It's Thursday, and you know what that means. We have a new episode of the It's Geoff Wilson Show that just dropped this morning. I have viewed, and I'm ready to review.
Entrepreneur.
Stick around. Sports Card Collectibles family, good to see you again here today. We are back. It is another day, is another sports card video. If you're new here or you've been hanging around, you're lingering, but you haven't subscribed yet, guys, what are you waiting for? We got the daily collectible style newsy type stuff that you can't get enough of. Please hit the subscribe button down below. We appreciate your support. Big thank you to today's video sponsor, ComC.com, your home for buying, selling, and flipping all the hottest trading cards. Their consignment marketplace now home to over 31 million cards from baseball's biggest stars like Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge, and Mookie Betts to Marvel favorites like Spider-Man, Thor, and Captain America. ComC has something for every type of collector, so make sure to visit ComC.com today to build out your collection with your favorite cards. All right, guys, so Geoff Wilson sits down with Kelly today to talk about some things that he's learned, 10 things that he's learned from visiting with Marshall Fogel. And if you don't know who Marshall Fogel is, he is the one that owns one of the PSA 1052 Topps Mickey Mantle cards, along with a plethora of other baseball cards.
I try to collect in a collage fashion. I like to have the uniform and the bat, and it's a full ticket. It's got a crease in it, and even if the back has got paste on it from a scrapbook, buy it. First of all, when you handle a ball, always use your fingers on the string. Because if you get it on the leather, you have oil in your fingers and you'll start staining it. Maybe some bragging rights here. The most complete Hall of Fame game used bat collection, bigger than the Hall of Fame.
You have more Hall of Fame game used bats
than the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And baseball memorabilia. Geoff said that he estimates his collection in the hundreds of millions of dollars. He's kind of this mega collector. It's 100% baseball focused. So it's interesting. He's an interesting guy. I've watched a couple of the different videos that where he shared kind of his thought process and different things with Geoff. And it's a cool series. Honestly, I hope that Geoff kind of does this where he travels around to these mega collectors and talks with them about kind of how they got into this, why, and all the stuff, because those are stories that would be awesome to tell. Off the bat, I'm going to disagree with Geoff on one of his opening statements talking about that 52 Topps Mantle and a PSA 10. He estimates that it's his estimate, kind of his opinion, that is a $50 million card.
And you must be the Monopoly guy.
Now, we know the highest selling price for a trading card was the SGC 9.5 that sold, what was it, 6 months ago, a year ago? Has it already been that long? $12.5 million is what it sold for. I really struggle with the extra premium, the PSA 10 premium, if you will, especially with the news that we've heard out here recently. So to think that an SGC 9.5 that looks incredible is $37.5 million less than a PSA 10. And I'm not taking away from Marshall's copy. I'm sure it is unbelievable if it's sitting in a PSA 10 holder. But again, just how much more unbelievable is it than that SGC 9.5? He does make a good point of like, hey, look, it only takes two huge money people that have big egos that want that card to spend $50 million on it. He even went further and said $150 million, which I think that he was just kind of getting amped up. I don't agree with the 100 or 150 million, but he's not wrong in the sense that it just takes two high net worth people with all the money that just want that card. For me personally, I am just not in the camp of, oh, it's a PSA 10, so it's worth 5x, 10x, or whatever that SGC 9.5 is. And I know some will say, hey, you're just an SGC homer, they're a channel sponsor, but SGC well known for their vintage grading expertise. I mean, I just don't see that PSA has that much better of a grader, a $30+ million grading team difference in price between the SGC 9.5 and a PSA 10. I just don't see that. That's where I stand on that card, but I do understand the fact that the general public might not agree with that statement, and they might say, yes, the PSA 10 is a $30, $40, $50 million card, $100 million card. I just think that's more buying the slab over the card. Now, I have not seen that card up close to compare it directly with the SGC 9.5. Maybe the hardcore vintage card collectors will say, hey, look, Fogel's card is that much better than that SGC 9.5 to where it should command that extra premium. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, my friends. So let me know in the comments if you're a vintage card collector and you have an opinion based on that SGC 9.5 versus the PSA 10. All right, one big takeaway that Geoff took from Marshall is thinking long term. Obviously, Marshall Fogel got into a lot of these pieces, the Ty Cobb, the Babe Ruth, the Mickey Mantle stuff, way back, going back 20, 30, 40 years ago. So from a price point perspective, he's in a very good spot. He got it at a good price. And it's interesting to me too, because you think all this stuff is so relative. There's a great documentary on the internet, on YouTube. It's called Cardboard Dreams. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. I'll see if I can put a link in the video description, but it's easy to find. Cardboard Dreams. Why is it so relevant? It's relevant because it is a time capsule. It's a college senior, or either a college or a high school senior that's doing a documentary on sports cards, and it gives you a great view. It's a time capsule going back to 1990, the thought process behind collectors of that time period. And it's talking to 13-year-olds and it's talking to 60, 70-year-old guys, that are saying, like, I don't understand why these guys are buying these Don Mattingleys when they should just spend a little bit extra for Willie Mays or for Mickey Mantle.
On through the present time, but we specialize in the 1910 through the 1970s. And we feel that a good representative area of that is the Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Duke Snider, and in my case, my favorite, the old Brooklyn Dodgers.
You collect for the tradition of the sport and not for the investment value, correct?
Yes, I'm a Dodger fan right away. Jackie Robinson Dodgers, you might call them.
I feel very strongly that there are too many baseball card companies since 1985 in the market. There's 6 or 7 major companies right now. I like the spirit of the Tops and the original Bowmans back in the late 40s and into the 50s and 60s when they were the only card companies.
I found today that the market for older cards in real nice condition, near mint to mint condition, you can, in many cases, double the price in the book. If a card says $500, I have no trouble getting $800 to $1,000 for it. Any quality old cards I have sell almost immediately. People do like them. As I said before, the money is available, so they do move. They don't move to the young kids generally. Around Christmas, Hanukkah, that's when a lot of these cards are sold to the kids. But the adult collector will come in, there's no problem, paying a few $100s for a really nice condition card. If the card isn't in such great shape, then you may wind up holding it for a while.
It's just very interesting to watch. You can see kind of the evolution of the hobby. You can very well see that as the world changes, a lot of things stay the same, and it goes back to that vintage stuff. It's a very interesting watch. But thinking long term, I think, is interesting because I think there's some confusion in this hobby between short-term flips and long-term holds. And we might not agree on what is a long-term hold. There might be something that I've got that I'm like, I'm going to hold this long-term. It's up to the individual whether that they want to hold that thing long-term. We are in kind of a sports card bear market coming off of a massive influx, a massive Mount Everest high and coming down low. So it's very easy to kind of poke holes at long-term holds on sports cards. It just is, because right now everything's been falling for the most part outside of a few things over the last 18 months. What, 2 years? 2 years. We're going on 2 years of prices falling, over 2 years. And so it does get easy to kind of get into this mode of there's nothing worth holding long term. But there will be things that holding long term make a lot of sense. Maybe it's not any of the new prospect stuff. Maybe it's one of them. Maybe it's 5 of them. We don't know who they are, but that's the short-term play stuff. I think there's a lot of fun in the prospecting side of buying, flipping short-term stuff. You want to get in on that baseball prospect that's 18 that is going to be the next Mike Trout, and maybe you miss on 19 of them, but that one makes up for the other 19 that you missed on. People just like that sports betting, sports gambling side of prospecting in sports. Same thing with the next great quarterback. Who's going to be the next Joe Montana? Who's going to be the next Tom Brady? There's nothing wrong with short-term flips there, but then also saying, you know what? I like Joe Burrow. I'm going to buy some of his stuff and I'm going to hold it long term. You can do both of these things. So I think there's some confusion there. But piggybacking off of that, what Marshall Fogel was saying is instead of going wider, really kind of narrow it down to the more rare stuff. The more rare stuff in the collectible space, if you can do it. And you hear this all the time with other YouTubers, other collectors, leveling up, consolidating up. This is something that I've struggled with over time because there's just a lot of cards that I like in that $100 to $500 range is where I live mostly. And I just feel like there's so many really cool cards for my collection in that range. If we're thinking though from a long-term money investing side of it, I don't think it's a bad idea to think about leveling up into things that are just more rare, harder to find, because that's really the name of the game with collectibles. Is that player, or is that, IP? Is it going to be relevant over time, 10, 20, 30 years over time if you're long-term holding? Is it still going to be something that people are interested in? And then also, how rare is that thing? And then also the price point. What price point did you get in on it? It's the trifecta. IP or player. If you notice too with Marshall Fogel, he's locked in on iconic baseball players. It's Babe Ruth, it's Mickey Mantle, it's Ty Cobb. I'm sure for him, he's probably thinking like, these are the guys. Like, I can't go wrong picking these guys. And he's got other players as well too. It's not like he only has that stuff, but you're locked in on the best players. Football and basketball cards have not caught up with the history of baseball card collecting, but I kind of wonder if that does change over time to where, not that it necessarily catches up, because you're not going to have the same superstar power that goes back in baseball to the early 1900s. In football and basketball, those stories just aren't there really. It just happened a little bit later. But as time goes on, we always kind of joke about like, oh, well, 80s and 90s is going to be vintage before long. Before you know it, there will be 100 years of football, 100 years of basketball being played. You will have kind of a longer history. And there is American history tied to basketball and football, those players, their journeys. And so as these leagues evolve, as sports evolve, it'll be interesting to see if there's a little bit of a catch up there. Jeff and Kelly, they were actually talking about soccer. And I know the Oppenheim brothers, who he's talked to before, they're big into vintage soccer. So you've seen the rise of soccer cards over the last few years. And a lot of it's centered around Messi, Ronaldo, Pele. Of course, Pele autographs have gotten very expensive. But then also you've just got kind of these vintage soccer legends and those cards, which I know for a long time, they weren't expensive. None of them have been graded. So you're looking at kind of like, what are those next things? What could be more relevant tomorrow, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years than it is today? Because again, even if you go back 30, 40 years for baseball, it wasn't the same relevance 30, 40 years ago as it is today. It's grown over time, has kind of cultivated this thing to where the legend has just grown for guys like Mickey Mantle and Babe Ruth and for Ty Cobb. It's just grown over time. So it's something like Mantle was iconic 30 years ago. He's even more iconic 30 years later. I'm sure the basketball card people are going to say, well, that sounds like Michael Jordan. That sounds like LeBron James. That sounds like, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain. You might be right. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. For football, Walter Payton, Jim Brown. I know it's weird to say Tom Brady because he's a modern player, but again, the legend probably continues to grow for guys like this. These are the premier guys of the sport. The NFL is at an all-time high in popularity. Of course, have to deal with concussions and how that's going to affect the sport moving forward, but it doesn't change what's already happened. Baseball attendance has been down. The interest in baseball has been down. Has vintage baseball been down? Has vintage sports memorabilia come down in interest or price point? Even though baseball as a sport over the last 10 years, attendance-wise, has really kind of waned a little bit? No. If anything, it's gotten more popular. So I don't know if we can look at popularity of the sport moving forward, how that would affect vintage items for that thing. I think those might be two separate things. So I think it's obvious to me if we look at Geoff Wilson, his collection, his buying habits or whatever, if we go back to 2018, I got in at the same time, 2018. He mentioned it that there is an adjustment that he's made over the last year where he's getting rid of really most of his low to mid-end slabs. He's doing the less is more thing where he's getting rid of more of the low-end slabs and getting into more of the higher-end stuff. Maybe it's 20 things that he sells to get into one or two things, and that's the way he's kind of rolling moving forward. And that is the way that high-end collectors operate. Jeff is a high-end collector, and so this seems like a natural evolution for the high-end buyer like a Geoff Wilson. So make sure to check out the It's Geoff Wilson show today, and don't forget,
You take the card and put it in the sleeve.
had to throw it in there. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.